everybody, and welcome to our webinar about the best kept secret in the credit union industry. I want to thank you for joining us, and let's go ahead and begin. Did you know that over $180 million per year go unused because credit unions fail to utilize CDA, charitable donation account capabilities? That's $180 million last year. That's $180 million this year. That is available, that is accessible, that is able to be deployed in your communities, that is just not utilized. And we're hoping to help fix that across the industry. So before we get into a lot of detail, what I would like to do is help us paint the picture of what is possible. What could you do? What if? What if you could eradicate hunger in your community? Every day in our communities, people go hungry, and there's a whole host of reasons, but resources are definitely one of those. What if through your efforts, not a single person in your community, the communities you serve, went hungry? What if you could sponsor all the youth athletics in the areas you serve? I'm not sure what it's like in your neck of the woods, but where I am, youth athletics are more and more expensive, which means folks who are budget conscious are effectively priced out of developing the capabilities of their children. That's where you could come in to help sponsor, to help develop youth athleticism in all of the areas you serve. What if you could end high school literacy? I don't know if you know this, but most literacy programs or illiteracy programs in high schools are really meant to catch up 1/2 to 1 grade level of deficiency in terms of performance. The problem is, once you get past that level, the tools that are being deployed really have very, very little impact on eventual literacy capability. So if you're stuck at a 3rd, 4th, 5th grade reading level and you're in high school, the programs that are being deployed don't help you. There are substantial capabilities that can fix that problem. The problem is they're not part of the state budget, so they require outside resources. So what if you could make it a mission to end high school illiteracy in your community, in the communities you serve? And then finally, what if you could provide a home to the homeless population in your city or town? As COVID-19 took hold, a lot of communities used the hotels that weren't being used effectively to house the homeless and help keep them isolated and protected so that COVID would cease to spread among those populations. What if you could provide the same in your city or town on a long run basis, or at least contribute to the solution? So as we develop the further discussion, I want to answer a key question, and that is, who is Nucleus? Why am I speaking to you today? Who are we? Well, we're a firm that is chartered to focus on credit unions only. So we're Nucleus Credit Union Advisors, and we provide investments that offset benefit expenses, CDA structures, non-qualified plan design, and of course, executive compensation advisory. And so that is the key. Those are the key areas that we work with you as a credit union in. Now, as I mentioned earlier, the concept is called a charitable donation account. And at the federal level, there are very specific laws or regulations that govern the charitable donation account. And there's some rules of the road. First and foremost is 5%. The amount that's allowed by a credit union to deploy into a charitable donation account at the federal level is 5% of net worth. You're not allowed to exceed that level in the charitable donation account specifically. 51%, this is a key figure. By regulation, the credit union sponsoring the charitable donation account is required to deploy 51% of the earnings from that account on a trailing 5-year basis to 501c3 entities. That could include your own foundation if it's registered as a 501c3 entity. So that 51% of earnings of the account must be deployed to those charitable organizations, which also means the credit union gets to retain, if it desires to do so, 49% of the earnings of that account. And that's important, which we'll come to later. Finally, 5 years. Distribution from this account must occur within 5 years in order to support those charitable entities. And the value that must be deployed is effectively a rolling look back of that prior 5-year period. And so what regulators didn't want to have happen, or what Congress effectively didn't want to have happen, is these become this kind of massive endowment pool that is never being distributed to the local community. Other operational requirements at the federal level must be established as a segregated account. So these assets have to be effectively segregated from the rest of your general investment operations. The management of those accounts is subject to regulatory oversight. So to the extent that a investment advisor is involved in the management of the portfolio or the plan, or to the extent that the assets are placed into a trust and managed or overseen by a trustee, that apparatus must be subject to its own regulatory oversight. So for securities and investment advisory, you've got, of course, FINRA, the SEC, and then on the insurance side, you've got, of course, state insurance agencies. And then finally, if a trust is used, you have the involvement of the OCC or potentially FDIC oversight in terms of trust vehicles. And then finally, written policies and procedures governing the plan. So you have to have rules of the road. What is the plan? How is it funded? What is it to be deployed for? What are the checks and balances involved? And again, any competent counterparty that you work with to establish a CDA should be able to help you navigate all of these components to make sure that you're compliant with the law as it stands. Here's a key example of how a CDA works. So a CDA asset, in this case, $5 million. So if we go back a couple of pages and we say, okay, $5 million means that credit union has a net worth of $100 million. So that asset's deployed in a CDA, and it is earning, in this hypothetical example, about 2.8%. Depending on the credit union, the size of the CDA, and a whole host of other factors, that yield could be higher or lower depending upon how this is deployed. But in this case, we're using the example of 2.8%, which provides $140,000 a year of income from the earnings in that plan. So what has to happen? 51% of the earnings in that plan have to be contributed to 501c3 entities. And that, in this example, equals about $71,500. The credit union then is able to retain about $68,600, which, if we calculate the yield with rounding, that ends up being about a 1.37% yield on the asset, which, given the current environment, would be a very compelling yield for the credit union to maintain. And so when we shared this example with one of our credit union clients who is exploring the concept, they basically exclaimed, this has to be the best kept secret in the credit union industry. I've not heard of this to date, which is what we're doing today and trying to fix that problem. And then number two, let me get this right. We're able to enhance the charitable giving that we're already doing, and in their case, actually expand it almost 7 times more than what they're doing today. But we're also able to actually earn more than our current investments are earning. And that was the value add to the credit union. And then finally, we're able to, of course, deploy those assets and help the community and deploy some of the liquidity we've got on our balance sheet. So it was a win-win-win from the standpoint of that credit union partner. So from an evaluation process, the first step in any evaluation process, of course, impact review. How do you want to have an impact? Now, that is a little bit more nuanced when it comes to the CDA, and this is where your partners will differentiate themselves based upon how they view this. Some view this as simply an investment vehicle. Others view this as a way to help your credit union have a substantial impact on your local community. And that's part of what has to factor into that impact review. In the prior example, if we look back one page, so the credit union in this case retains $71,500. That's a reasonable sum of money. That can do a lot. That could be $7,000, $10,000 scholarships. That could be funding a school literacy program for potentially 20 different individuals. It depends on what you're trying to do with that money. But take it a step further. What if I asked members to contribute to help us do more for the community, and you're going to match them dollar for dollar up to $70,000? So now you've turned that $71,000 into $140,000. What if you did a double play where you used employee contributions combined with member contributions to magnify? Well, now you're at over $210,000 of value that you can deploy to your community. So those are some ways that you want to look through the impact review component of the example. Scope of potential commitment based on net worth. That's a preset formula for maximum commitment, but based on other categories and other components of your balance sheet, what is the probable or what is the likely commitment you might look to enter into? What alternatives are there? As I mentioned earlier, that yield example was a hypothetical, but there are various and numerous alternatives that you can use to take advantage of the CDA concept. What do those look like? How do they trade off? How likely are they to succeed and fulfill the mission? Internal policies and review. Of course, you've got investment policies already in place. This is where you'd want to look at those policies and see, A, do they allow for this already? Or B, if not, do you need to get a modification at either the level of asset liability committee, investment committee, and or the board? Integration and approval with stakeholders. So depending on structure, there may be involvement with HR, there may be involvement with business development, community relations, there may be involvement with senior management team, there may be involvement at the teller level, there may be involvement with a number of different stakeholders. So leveraging your CDA to the maximum effect possible is going to require integration and approval with those stakeholders. Regulatory approval. Now, this one I probably should have put an asterisk by, but CDA at the federal level is codified. It is in the Code of Federal Regulations. It is law. So you're allowed to do this at the federal level without further regulatory approval, unless you're under some kind of limitation order. At the state level, however, various states have different regulations. So I'll give an example. State of Illinois allows for this as a part. They've adopted the Federal Register language directly into their administrative code. Other states have parity provisions. Some states have parity provisions, but you have to request that authority. So depending on what jurisdiction you lie in and what your charter type is, that will determine what and if you need to seek any additional regulatory approval for the program. And then finally, final approval and funding inception. And that's when the wheels start turning to generate that excess yield that's going to support that charitable giving effort in your community. Practical use of CDAs. So there's the Children's Miracle Network. And if you look at the Credit Union Cherry Blossom Run, which I've run a number of times, that is an example of credit unions coming together, hosting a great event, sponsoring a great event to benefit a worthwhile charitable organization. Most credit unions across the country will do something aligned with the Children's Miracle Network as part of their annual process of giving. So that's a great use for funds. The National Credit Union Foundation. So an organization basically chartered to help remedy the gaps in financial literacy across our nation, really benefits strongly from contributions to help with that effort, but also helps with being able to educate those youth in our community and the upcoming adults so that we don't have this persistent issue like the student loan debt crisis. And then finally, United Way. A number of credit unions and organizations across the country work very closely with their local United Way to help try and leverage and scale charitable giving across corporations nationally. So what are some strategies that you might use for maximum success or impact? First, employee engagement. One of the questions we get on the compensation side of the house, especially right now, because talent and hiring is so difficult in the current environment. But one of the questions we get is, how do I get my employees to truly engage and really come on board? Number one, join us. Number two, stay engaged once they're here. And what we're finding from various studies is the younger cohort, the younger generation. And I always want to say millennials, but millennials are getting a little long in the tooth. They're not the youth that we thought of them previously. Now we're looking at Gen Y. And what we're finding is the younger employees want to have an employer who's really focused on aspects of corporate social responsibility, diversity, equity, and inclusion, and community involvement, community service. So what better way to help engage that potential candidate, that potential employee, or that existing employee by saying, hey, we've got this program, we're trying to leverage our impact in the community directly. We have now funding for this effort, and this goes into part of a bigger plan that allows them to be engaged and connected to your employee, to your credit union at a very fundamental level. Member engagement. Again, the challenge is we've got a lot of members. The aggregate member age in the industry seems to be aging. So as we're trying to engage younger members to become sound financial stewards and sound financial members of the credit union, how do we engage them? Again, the same thing. We're looking at individuals who will select where they consume goods or how they consume goods based on the corporate social responsibility mandate that's espoused by that firm. By bringing this to that group, you've now said, hey, we are a part of the community. We want to help the community, both by delivering financial services and products, but also by truly giving of time, money, and resources to the community to fix those problems we can all identify. Community development. Credit union here in the place I live, which is Michigan, actually worked with a community to help resolve student lunch debt. So it turns out when a kid goes to school and they don't have money in the account, they get effectively kind of a line of credit, if you would, and are able to be fed, because again, we don't want kids to go hungry. And if they're in the gap where the social programs that provide free school lunches don't provide it, or if it's just a cash crunch for the family at that time or whatever, they can get the lunch, but then there's an account that has a balance. And the problem is in some districts that has actually been contemplated as a reason to withhold diplomas or other detrimental aspects to those families. And so they were able to resolve that simply by retiring that school lunch debt. And the impact to the community was profound in terms of helping those who were really at a rough spot, couldn't manage that expense on top of whatever else they were facing, and this helped them get through that. And finally, public relations. I hate to say it, but if no one knows that you did the good work, then the good work doesn't benefit the public image, of course, of the institution. So really working to leverage social media, Instagram, Facebook, your local press releases, national publications, and get that traction from the efforts that you're putting in, both in terms of the action that you're taking, but also in terms of making this a strategic mandate of the organization. So it's known that XYZ Credit Union is a staunch supporter and member of this community and is here to stand by this community in good times and bad. So as we bring the session to a close, what I would like to do is give you some thoughts around defining success. So one group, the Gates Foundation, the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, wants to eradicate polio in Africa. And as of 2020, and this is per the Gates Foundation website, the World Health Organization declared the Africa region free of wild polio virus. Now, there's still a lot of work to be done, but that is an audacious goal. And they were able to do this at a fraction of what it would cost to do most of any excursion. It was a relatively limited cost relative to the impact on the lives of people in that region. The LA Family Housing Authority wants to eliminate homelessness. So to date, they've put about 1,387 people into permanent housing, with 97% of those tenants retaining their housing. One aside from the COVID environment, in a lot of cities, homeless populations were housed in hotels in order, again, to protect their health and to help protect the health of everybody around. What a lot of those folks found was, due to the fact that they were in a stable living environment, they were able to gain permanent employment. So it really fed the studies that are showing that having a stable foothold from which to rebuild your life is very, very important. So how do you want to change the world from that standpoint? And then finally, the Michael J. Fox Foundation fundraises to find a cure for Parkinson's. To date, they've raised more than $650 million for Parkinson's research. And thanks to their work, a very close friend of mine has effectively lived probably two to 3 years longer than was expected when he was originally diagnosed with Parkinson's. So really working to touch the lives of those who are afflicted with such an insidious disease. So as we bring our time together to an end, what I would like to ask you is, how will you and your credit union truly change the world? Again, my name is John Moreno. I'm with Nucleus Credit Union Advisors. We would welcome a conversation to help see how charitable donation accounts can help your credit union make a significant impact for your members and your community. Thank you.